Phil, that was Marianne Williamson back on the show. It was great to have her on, and her new book, Tears to Triumph. She's a tremendous public speaker, and in an interview, the same type of passion, energy comes in to what she has to say. I mean, she's very powerful in her speech, I think.
Yeah, she's a unique presence on the landscape these days, and as you said, a powerhouse.
Yeah.
She's just, the power of conviction and concern just shines through her.
Yeah,
I mean, she's brilliant, and her intelligence comes through, but that force of conviction and caring just is really overwhelming.
Yeah, she's very committed to what she does as you walk her talk, and this is a very important subject matter because we're getting to a point, just from a science standpoint, where perhaps someday you'll be able to take a pill and never experience any pain or discomfort ever again. But then, would you be a human being? What would that do to the human experience? Would you take that pill if you
Yeah.
could? Probably not. But it's very thought provoking, and what's happening now is you have these pharmaceuticals. It's all profit driven. I'm constantly hearing about new psychological and physiological disorders, and then sometimes I think maybe these disorders exist so they can prescribe more drugs for more people.
Yeah, yeah.
It's out
Oh,
of
there's no
control.
question about it. It's like in the medical world, if you look at the even physical medicine, the requirements for when a person should be recommended something like blood pressure medication or cholesterol medication, that changes over time, and it's not necessarily data driven. It's there's good reason to suspect that it's driven by the profits of selling drugs. And why wouldn't it be different in the psychiatric world? Where, I mean, I know psychotherapists, psychiatrists who prefer to do psychotherapy, but the insurance companies don't reimburse for the hour of their time the way they do if they just write a prescription. It's just people, the whole system is geared to giving people pills because they deem it more cost effective that way.
Right. It's unbelievable.
And profitable.
Yeah, and you have to step back, and then once a person goes down that road, it's hard to return to the road we're actually going through the therapy. And
yeah, I mean, you and I grew up in a time when, somebody said they had a headache, somebody would automatically say you should take something. And as Marianne said, that's now in the realm of psychology.
Right.
You're sad, you're depressed, take something.
Right.
It's a scary situation.
Right. And I want to make it clear. I mean, she makes it very clear in the book that psychotropic drugs can save people's lives, and there's people that are bipolar and schizophrenic and severely depressed, and all of these things, are necessary tools to deal with it, but it's being overdone. It's the same thing. What we were talking about the schools, kids get warehoused in schools. They sit from 9 to 5 every day in a classroom. They're 10 years old, 12 years old. All they want to do is get up and run around. Some schools don't have physical education anymore. They don't have music anymore. They don't have art. They're just in the classroom. So these kids some of the kids are bouncing off the wall. There's nothing psychologically wrong with them. Some kids have a predisposition. They can sit there and deal with it. Other kids, it's much more difficult. But the thought of then, okay, let's give them some drugs because it's easier for the teacher, it's easier for the parents, and they have this kid, sitting in the corner quietly. Oh, isn't Johnny wonderful now? Isn't Mary such a nice student that she just sits there, and they're on drugs? What can you learn?
Mm-hmm.
What does that do to them in the long run? It's crazy.
No, but it makes life easier for the school teachers and the administrators, and that's probably one of the reasons they do it.
Yeah.
It's a pathologizing of normalcy, as
right.
Marianne said,
right.
And that's a scary thing. But it also, to get it back into the realm of spirituality. I know people in long-term people who are researchers in consciousness and practitioners And even they would say there can be a use for an antidepressant once in a while. We don't want to go overboard.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people prescribe antidepressants on a short-term basis, just so people can do psychotherapy. Right. And get into, because they've been numbed by some trauma, and sometimes they can't even think clearly, they can't process their emotions. So sometimes the drugs actually have value in moving a person forward in a non-pharmaceutical way on a short-term basis. So these are nuanced phenomena, but there's no question Marianne's on target with the overuse of these drugs.
Yeah, there's no doubt people's lives have been saved and bettered through psychotropic drugs, but the overuse is just unbelievable. The other thing that was interesting to me is, heard the title of the book, Tears to Triumph, The Spiritual Journey from Suffering to Enlightenment. Well, both of us have been involved in spiritual movement and meditation and the quest for enlightenment. And at least in the culture of the TM movement back in the day, I don't think so anymore. When I was initially involved in it, there was this thought or feeling that you had to be kind of happy all the time. Any expression of depression or anxiety or discomfort was, ooh, this guy is not very enlightened. And I think that's kind of an unhealthy attitude to have, and it's also a misunderstanding of what spiritual growth means. And I think most people have matured out of that. I don't think that culture exists so much within the TM movement anymore. I don't know how it is with other groups, but you get that feeling.
I think people are more sophisticated now with these things, but I just have to, my perspective. Having researched American Veda, a lot of these phenomena that people think are just part of the organization or the community they were part of, they're really endemic. And this kind of what some people call spiritual bypassing was very, very common in all the spiritual movements, all the guru-led movements, the Buddhist community. In fact, the term spiritual bypass came from a psychiatrist in the or psychotherapist
how
in
would
the
you
Buddhist
define
world.
Spiritual bypass?
Well, it's this kind of bypassing the stuff of life, ordinary human ups and downs and suffering, ordinary, the kind of emotional and psychological baggage we all need to deal with, and pretending it doesn't exist and living in the hope or the illusion that it will all get better through meditation or your yoga or whatever, and all the karma would burn off, and you don't have to attend to these things. You don't have to attend to the ups and downs of real life. And there's a kind of pretense that everything is fine and we're all happy and everything is good and an avoidance of dealing with psychological issues or, life's crises. But I think people, in large part, that was a phenomenon of the baby boomers' early days of spiritual development. But you see it now, too, with millennial yogis and all that. There's peer pressure sometimes to be happy because, we're spiritual. And I'm sure it goes on in churches and temples and everywhere else too, but people grow up and life has a way of teaching us these things.
Right. Marianne talks about that. Our culture's obsession with being happy all the time. Not that we shouldn't be happy all the time. Not that that's not the goal, but sometimes you have to work through a lot of stuff to get there. And the point she makes is nobody wants to suffer, but it's at times when people go through suffering that sometimes they come out a stronger person. And it's not unlike, look, it's like pain. Nobody wants pain, but if your ankle doesn't hurt, then you don't know to attend to it. If suffering comes into your life, depression, anxiety, something needs to be attended to. And it's not always easy to figure it out what it is. And then once you figure out what it is, how to make it better. But I think that's that's part of being a human, being able to deal with these things. And she said,
and to face it for what it is, and she was very candid about her own experiences with this. And then there's people like Marianne and good psychotherapists and good pastors and spiritual counselors and all the rest who can help you not numb yourself to the suffering or the pain or to avoid it, but to use it and use it to foster your spiritual growth and your own learning and maturity. We grow from these things. Remember we had Mirabai Starr on, and
Right.
that was a big part of her conversation was, what the spiritual growth that came out of the dark night of the soul, historically, and in her case, with the death of a child. And you see this from a lot of spiritual teachers, and it's great that someone with Marianne's platform is taking this on.
Right, and it was also interesting what she talked about, people being overly protective of their kids in school and not wanting them to experience this or that might be uncomfortable or whatever. And it was not unlike, Prince Siddhartha, the Buddha, his father wanting to protect him from all things bad, and then he sees these things, and then he grows from that, and he moves on to not only grow from that, but to help other people.
Yeah, that's right, and that's probably why there's a chapter on Buddha in Marianne's book. When she said that thing about parents wanting kids to, be safe and avoid pain all the time, it made me think of the uses of infectious disease. Kids' immune systems are strengthened because they're exposed. They get a cold early on. They get a flu early on. They catch it from their friends at school. But without those early experiences, the immune system doesn't get stronger. Right. And maybe it's just something similar happens on a psychological level.
Yeah, I think exactly. If your kid was born, you put them in a bubble and protecting them from all germs, and then all of a sudden, they're 12 years old, you let them out. Then they have no immunity to anything. So, yeah, a lesson to be learned, and it's always balancing. You do want to, you have responsibility to protect, and you want to protect, but you need to balance that with letting people learn life's lessons and working through things.
And learn good lessons from it. So Marianne's perspective is a deep spiritual one. So the advice she would give people for working with periods of suffering would be very elevating. It wouldn't just be coping. Mm-hmm. It would be, to transcend and to grow and to move higher. And if you have people like that in your life and sources of that kind of inspiration, it could be, periods of suffering could be extremely useful. There's so many stories of people who suffer deeply and then come out of it and say, in a way, I'm grateful for that experience because now I know this and I've learned that.
Right. No, it's I think wonderful advice, and and I'm sure everybody listening has gone through good and bad periods in their life and learned the life's lessons that are there, and those lessons are there to learn so you can avoid that suffering in the future. But sometimes it's inevitable, and hopefully we all develop tools to deal with that. Well, it was always great having Marianne on the show, and look forward to having her on again.
Right, our first repeat guest.
Yeah. We have about
great.
We have about, I don't know, well over 60 shows posted.
We have
now.
over 50. I counted yesterday.
And I wanted to say to our listeners, I saw posted up on Facebook the other day that Phil Goldberg, with whom I am speaking right now, has been meditating. He's spent some time in meditation.
48 years.
48 consecutive years. I'm a couple of years behind you. And,
it makes me feel old.
Yeah, but very evolved. Always growing on the path.
Yeah.
Enlightenment.
Well, we do our best. I always remember that day because it was my father's birthday as well.
Oh.
So
anyway, more soon. Got some great shows coming up. And
yes, we do.
Spirit Matters at spiritmatterstalk.com. Let folks know know about us. And if you have any thoughts or suggestions, please email us. It's all there at the website, all the information.
Okay.
Next time.
Next time, Dennis.